Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining today. Before I jump into all the stuff we're going to be speaking on today, I want to first thank, obviously, Caitlin for helping set all this up. John Hobbins, who's not in here yet, he's taking care of a family matter, but he'll be joining us in just a couple of minutes. Pat, who's going to be doing quite a bit of the chatting here today, an unbelievable resource, and then our guy that we lean on for just about everything, Jonathan Gold. Thank you for being part of all of this today. Looking forward to it. And yeah, this is the kickoff to our winter season here with all the educational formatting we've got going on. So we've got quite a bit of things lined up this year, and I want to thank all of you for taking time out of your crazy schedules to join us today. And it's pertinent that I'm here to tell you that out of all the different educational pieces that we're going to be tying together this year, this isn't just a one-off. This isn't just a meeting that we're going to be hosting today. We're here for you throughout the entire year. So myself, Pat, Jonathan, if you have any questions in regards to anything that we might be able to assist you with, not only now, but certainly throughout the rest of the calendar year, please don't hesitate to reach out. This is going to be a community where we're all helping one another along. So I personally am really excited about what we're going to chat about today, because we all have completely different platforms that we work from. None of us are complete experts on everything. So this community forum, I think, is going to be an unbelievable platform for us to check a lot of boxes, answer a lot of questions, maybe throw some caution to the wind and help one another tie together some loose ends that'll benefit us going forward. Before we all jumped on this Zoom here, we were having a quick powwow, and Pat and I were laughing how neither one of us have too much ego. And although we've both been through quite a few negotiations, there's quite a few people in this room who have been through more negotiations and probably more extensive negotiations than we both have. So by no means are we bragging on being the best, and we'd love to learn from them in this platform as well. So without further ado, I'm Nick Yaun. Recently just took on the head professional position over at Century, which I'm very excited about. But prior to that, I spent 13 years at Brayburn Country Club as the head professional there, and went through 5 different negotiations during my time there. So I'm excited to share what I've got with you. And Pat, why don't you take us on over and give us a little snapshot about you and your experiences.
Sure. Thanks, Nick. And thanks everybody for joining this morning. Like Nick and Jonathan, looking forward to the conversation today, and pleased to be a part of it. I'm Pat Gunning. I'm the head professional at Noyak Golf Club. I just finished my 4th season. Prior to here, I was the head professional at the Catanza Club in Marion, Massachusetts for 4 years. Throughout my tenure at both places, I've gone through 4 negotiations with different people and different club members, and looking forward to sharing my experience and hopefully being able to help some of you on the call.
So Jonathan, not that I want to step on your toes, but I think it's only fair for us to introduce you, because I can personally say I've called Jonathan probably 1 to 2 times a year, probably ask him the same question multiple times, which he's probably sick and tired of answering. But I'm sure I'm not the only one that reaches out to him regularly. So Jonathan, why don't you give us a little snapshot on all the things that we probably don't realize that you do for us behind the curtain that we're much appreciative of.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Thanks, Pat. Kind of like the Wizard of Oz, but honestly, it's a pleasure. It's really neat to see that we have over 80 Metropolitan PGA members in this educational seminar. I think 96 signed up. I was surprised that, it's contracts, right? So it's probably pretty bland, you'd think, as far as a topic. It's, literally is black and white, but it is very personal. And, myself, and I'd be remiss to not mention, Jeff Voorhees also is very in tune with the members' contracts as well in the section. And as on paper, as similar as they look, everyone has a different contract with their current facility, and they're personal, right? So certainly, as Nick mentioned before, if you have any questions, please type them in the chat. Please feel free to raise your hand. But wrapping up this call, know that you have a support team to kind of lean on should you have any personal questions in regard to your contract. looking over some of the metrics here, it's like, at private facilities in a metropolitan section, about 65 to 70% of PGA professionals have a contract. A lot of that has to do with, the ownership of the golf shop concession. But again, they're so unique and in a good way, right? There's a lot of positive things that go into it. There's a lot of reasons why we feel it's important for you to have a contract, even though we work and are employed at will states. But we'll certainly get into that. So Nick, without further ado, it certainly is a pleasure to be, a career consultant for you, the Metropolitan PGA professionals, and help guide you through this process. But Nick and Pat are amazing, and they have firsthand experience and really how to negotiate successfully a better contract each time. So Nick, if it's okay, I just would love to throw out a very simple question, but let's rewind a little bit for both you and Pat, and let's dive into a little bit about your first contract when you were an assistant professional and the club came to you and said, we'd like to offer you the job, sign on the dotted line. What do you remember about that? And, what are the emotions that kind of went into it? And then also maybe a little bit about, are there things that you should have been more aware of, as you fast forward into the future and looking back? So Nick or Pat, I'll turn it over to you guys.
Pat, if you want to go first, by all means, buddy.
Sure. Yeah, I remember this was 2015 for me, or 2014, I guess, when I had my first offer to become a head professional. And the first emotion was exhilaration. Like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I finally have this opportunity. How cool is this? For a lot of reasons, I had been going north-south for as an assistant for 8-10 years, and the thought of settling down with my fiance at the time was really exciting. And okay, we're going to establish our life. We're going to get set up and be in one place. So all those emotions come through, and it's a very exciting time. And you go into a negotiation process with a club that you haven't worked at before, without any head professional experience. And my first thought was, I'm just going to sign this paper and get going. Whatever's on it, let's go. I just want to work hard and get this going. And some advice that had been given to me prior to starting my tenure there was, whatever they offer you, if it's reasonable, really consider taking it and work hard to make it into a great job. So I kind of went into my negotiation. It wasn't really much of a negotiation the first time around with that in mind. And what the club had offered me was very, very reasonable. And compared to what I was earning as an assistant, seemed like, I was going to live like a king. So at the time, I think in hindsight, I wish I would have used a resource like Jonathan or the career consultant in New England at that time, whoever that was, to get some data on average compensation and compensation of head professionals of my neighbor clubs in that area to get a feeling as to whether what the club had offered me was actually good or not. So I think in hindsight, I would have done a little more research on that rather than letting the excitement of the opportunity cloud my judgment a bit. But all in all, it worked out just fine. And I think that was the only thing I would do differently, is do a little more homework before going into that process, which helped me in future processes. So Nick, I'll turn it back to you.
I wish mine was as clean as that. I took over in 2010. The golf shop had just burnt down to the ground. The clubhouse was going through a massive renovation. We were working out of a trailer, and Rayburn offered me this job with a golf shop concession, which at the time was in a trailer. And my contract was about a paragraph long. And I remembered signing it and thinking to myself, like, I am a head professional. And then like taking a step back and being like, boy, this is some head professional job I got right now. There was literally not a structure on property that anybody could use. So I was just happy to have a job at the time. The nice part was, as I matured in my career, evolved, the club's facilities obviously started to come together, and the financial programming of Rayburn improved over time, which helped me also mature through that negotiating phase. But I kid you not, my first contract negotiation wasn't a negotiation at all. It was, here was a process. Here's a piece of paper, sign it. It was a 1-year deal. I remember it vividly. I remember them saying that if I were able to get through 1 season well, and the golf shop was built, we can then start talking about the future. So my first year was kind of a glorified assistant deal because there was no pro shop to really speak of. So mine was an upside down, backward start. But the beauty of it was watching something that was in its infancy and then the club coming back together and obtaining a nice new pro shop and then trying to build that throughout the years and turning one contract into another. So, Pat, I wish mine was as straightforward as yours. And, you know, you felt like a head professional that first year. I was just trying to keep the train on the track. But fast forward down the road now, obviously it's a completely different entity than what we took it over from. But yeah, year 1 into year 2, which is probably more similar for me into what your first negotiation was then the golf shop being part of my package. So that's when things changed quite a bit. I was at the time really young. I'm going to jump around a little bit because I know we all get head professional opportunities at different ages. My second year at Braeburn, I was 27 years old. And at that time, they wanted to have this nice retail experience, being that the golf shop was brand new and the clubhouse had just opened. And I didn't have but maybe 30 grand to my name at the time. So what my biggest negotiation was for that contract was simply the club giving me an interest-free loan. That way I was able to afford the ability to properly stock that golf shop. So I bring that up only because once I got that, I negotiated that into my contract for as long as I had been at Braeburn. So my salary was what it was. At the beginning of my career, I remember the negotiation was them fulfilling the majority of my salary at the beginning of the season, as well as giving me that interest-free loan. That way I could float the golf shop. And that platform was built from the very start. So Pat, I don't know if you've ever had to deal with anything like that, but I was just trying to get my feet underneath me. And the negotiation I had was basically, if you guys can at least give me the chance to get started fiscally, it's going to benefit the membership's experience with your own shop.
Yeah, Nick, for sure. You know, my first job at Catanza, the club owned the shop. So I didn't have any financial outlay that was out of my pocket to own and operate the shop at that time. But I did have, as part of my contract, incentives for bonuses based on the performance of that shop. So I ran the shop like it was my own, and my bonus payout at the end of the year was based on a percentage of, based on kind of gross profit and percentages based on different tiers. So it was a nice arrangement because I had a lot of upside without the risk in a way. So as a 27-year-old, was the same age as a 27-year-old kid, again, who'd been working as an assistant without much free cash in the bank. That was a nice situation because I didn't have the financial commitment of owning a shop initially, but I had the upside potential of earning out of the shop. So that was the way that deal was structured, and I can share some more detail on that as we get deeper in the conversation. But when I came to Noyak, yes, I own the golf shop now at Noyak, and again, moving down to Long Island, especially Eastern Long Island from Massachusetts, which isn't exactly a low rent district in Massachusetts, but you know, trading a house in Massachusetts for a smaller house in Long Island for 3 times the money. Yes, I didn't have a whole lot of money to invest in ownership of the shop. So the club did offer me an interest-free loan for my first 2 seasons, in the form of a line of credit, in a way, with the club, at 0 interest. And part of my contract includes ownership of the practice facility, and the members pay in a minimum dollar amount to the shop each spring. So that was kind of how I was able to float my inventory first year here at the club, and thankfully never really had to go into that line of credit, but it was just a nice kind of backboard in case I needed some help financially. So that's kind of my experience with dealing with lines of credit and funding shops and things of that nature. And I think the club, mine's probably unique. I don't think many facilities offer the range anymore as a benefit or as a revenue stream for the golf professional. But that was the club's way to help get me some money up front to fund inventory for the shop.
Yeah, Nick and Pat, you bring up well, one of first of probably many very good things that our assistants should probably be a little bit aware of when they're negotiating for a head professional contract, or at least their first one. Even head professionals, that it's almost commonplace for clubs now to at least offer some type of interest-free loan to the head professional. They're very aware of the financial demands of who's going to take to stock the inventory, depending on the size of your golf shop. And I think Nick and Pat, you just mentioned as well. Nick, you also have that, or at least had it in your contract at Brayburn, where the club was still providing upfront cash at 0%. And you obviously, but the terms of that, when did you have to repay that, and was that beneficial for you?
Super beneficial. The terms of it were really easy, actually. So I received that check every year on March 15th. The agreement was they asked me to pay it back by the end of September. And if I didn't have it paid back by the end of September, then they were just going to start to deduct the funds from my salary from that point going forward. So the club really didn't have any liability at the end of the day, because they had, one way or the other, they were going to get their money back, whether I paid it up front or if they were starting to deduct it from my salary after their fiscal season had ended. I always paid it back well in advance. That way I didn't feel uncomfortable asking for it following years. And I don't know if everybody in here owns a shop, but as you get into the July, August portion of the season, you're going to start seeing the money that you put out come back into the house. So there was never any issues with being able to repay the loan, but the club always had the safety valve of my salary at the end of the day, then being able to pull from if for whatever reason it was unattainable for me to pay back that loan. So it was an extended line of credit, Pat. I think that was the best way that you verbed it. But at the end of the day, the club wants to see you succeed, because the value add that you're giving them is they're the beneficiaries at the end of the day of that line of credit being extended your way. So one hand was completely washing the other, no doubt about it.
I was the same, Nick. I was, if I tapped into that credit line, it had to be paid back by the end of the year. It was pretty easy and clear cut. But I think maybe transition a bit away from details and specifics of golf shop and maybe more into kind of preparation for your negotiations and what you do, how you lean on Jonathan for resources and for information, how you lean on your peer group to kind of get to a point where you feel comfortable walking into that room with the people you're going to speak with.
Because just one quick question from Mike, and then Monique, I saw your question here. I'll answer that one. But Mike, Argentina, a question for you, Nick. How much was the loan for each year to stock the shop?
I asked for $50,000 at that March 15th date. That never changed from 2010 straight through even till this past year.
Yeah, and I also would anticipate that helped you pay off the terms, right, for the goods purchased to be more favorable for you as well. And then,
Yep, no doubt. And it was plenty. There wasn't any issues with that not being enough to help cover relative to the buying programs.
Yep. Awesome. And then Monique, a great question here. What advice the panelists can offer for non-head professionals in the room, that typically do not have contracts? I know we're going to get into this probably towards the end, but we can tackle it right now. How can those non-head professionals pretty formulate a contract, or at least a written agreement to take more control over their employment terms, whether it's working hours, compensation, responsibilities, et cetera? Like, do you have anything that you do with your staff? If not, I'm happy to answer this as well. It's more of like an offer sheet, but just something that you would sign on, or an agreement with your employer that it's a little bit more than word of mouth.
I'll jump in. Yeah, we do offer sheets, offer of employment sheets with compensation terms, with expectations of responsibility. And I try to be fairly detailed on those, not into the minutia of what's happening day to day, but definitely detailed on what the total compensation package value is, including benefits that the certain staff member might be eligible for, like cell phone reimbursement, health insurance, 401k, trying to lay those things out on paper so that the staff member coming on knows what they're going to get, and knows what they're responsible for. But it's not a formal contract with our staff members, but it is an offer of employment, which at least kind of spells out what they can expect when they come to work at the club.
Jonathan,
And I think the same thing. I think if in being in that situation on the other side of the negotiating table, as the person making a hiring decision, I think the more prepared that the person is with what their asks and needs are, the easier it makes my job. And at the end of the day, I think for assistants on the call and non-head professionals on the call, I think it's important to understand that, in our position, Nick and I and other head professionals want to get you as much as we possibly can. But we have to go through a process of getting approval to spend the money from the board. So whatever you asked for in a negotiation with your superior, we have to then justify with our board or our owner, to try to sell that to them, that this person is going to bring that value to the club, and it's important that we compensate them accordingly. So I think, again, use Jonathan as far as the compensation data that he has at his fingertips, and just understand the process. It's not me or Nick saying like, hey, we can't pay you X. It's in the greater scheme of the budget of the club and how the club does financially as well.
Yeah, I'll just chime in a little bit there. Very good points, Pat and Nick. That just because you're not a head golf professional and don't have your inventory, let's say a golf shop is where the contracts are primarily derived from, that provide protection to head professionals, there is not a reason why you shouldn't have at least an offer letter, so having something black and white. Now more than ever, PGA professionals have the leverage to negotiate better terms, whether it's compensation or work-life balance. So for you to have a written black and white agreement with your employer is important, right? So there's, when you get into July and August and you want to take that weekend day off, or you have PTO, and just because you talked about it in April, doesn't mean that that's, hopefully that your employer is accountable for that and will grant you that PTO. But as we all know, it's very easy for, rounds to increase far more than we can anticipate. There's more events on the calendar. So just having that in black and white, and that mutual agreement that's signed off upon is going to help you. It's going to help you. It's going to help your relationship. And then often we get into that conversation with clubs. Sometimes clubs just don't have contracts, right? So when we try to negotiate on behalf of the PGA members, we try to educate them on why contracts are just important. And for its simplicity, it's just to have a mutual understanding that both parties can refer to at any time and doesn't get lost in the shuffle. So again, if you have any questions about that and what is typical, even for non-head professional positions, it could be amount of hours in the license, it could be, amount of days off. Are you having a weekend day off? Is there, as Pat mentioned before, are there benefits, are there bonuses or performance bonuses? That is something that you probably should have in black and white, or else you're unfortunately setting yourself up to a he said, she said at the end of the year when the dust settles. And that ultimately, a lot of times, unfortunately, creates friction in the employer-employee relationship.
I'd kind of be curious to know how many assistants on the call have had the opportunity to sit down with, their head professional and a member of the board or member of the executive committee when they're talking about compensation and expectations. And I as an assistant myself, I didn't have that experience. So walking into my first contract negotiation for a head professional position was kind of the first time I had ever really done that. So throughout the hiring process, here I try to involve, in my case, it's my golf chairman who's a member of the executive committee at the club. He's willing and he's been great to be involved in some of these discussions that gives, my lead assistant or director of outside operations or other assistants a little bit of experience in what it's like working with a board member on some compensation negotiations. It's very light. It's not very deep that they get into it with the golf chairman, but I have found it valuable to include him. It also helps me to kind of get the assistants to where they want to be from a compensation perspective if that person's involved, and here's what that person is saying, what their needs are, what their desires are based on compensation in the area. So I think we've been successful at doing that, and thankfully my golf chairman's been willing to do it. But I think hopefully it also helps with giving some experience. So when these guys go into the room for their head professional job negotiation, they've kind of been there before a little bit.
Jonathan, you helped me quite a bit 4 or 5 years ago. It's awkward to have to go and ask. Any negotiations difficult for ourselves, nonetheless, whenever we're going to speak on assistance. And Jonathan, it was your idea. My last negotiation at Brayburn, we built in the compensation for all of my assistants into my contract, simply because they're not typically going to be given a seat at the table, and it's hard enough for us to get small things for our own orbit. Nonetheless, have an individual assistant sit down with those same committee members that a lot of times change annually in order to have a basis that they can work off of. And Jonathan, you created that concept 4 years ago why don't you just take all of your assistants as a whole, create a separate line item in your contract, Nick, to where they are protected. And if you get an annual raise, well, then they should have the ability to have a mean annual raise as well relative to the other assistants in the section, so that it can be addressed annually or biannually relative to how the club and you see fit. And I did actually have the opportunity to pull that off. And talking about employment agreements, it's easy to show and explain to the assistants through your own contract that you have their best interest at heart. And when you did go to that negotiating table, you had the ability to speak and to protect them through the written word in your contract, because I, as an assistant, never had a contract. I do think that you will see some of that change in the near future. I know of one assistant, at least 2 assistants in the last 30 days that have received contracts from their clubs, which is a nice change of pace. And I think we can certainly piggyback off of that. It has to start somewhere. But I do think that'll be a trend that we do see going forward. But if you don't think that the club will entertain that opportunity, I don't think it's out of the question to go and try to protect them through your own contract. Because when I brought it up, it wasn't actually a sticking point. It was a way for me to explain to the club that I'm just looking out for everybody's best interest, not just my own, when I went to that negotiating table. So Jonathan, thank you for that a couple of years ago.
Yeah, Nick, just a question, because I find myself starting to become like a kid in a candy store. Like every time there's this like little breadcrumb that's dropped that I can take and we can share with another professional to help them out. So Nick, what you're saying in your contract is that you obviously have your standard increases. Let's say it was a 3-year or 5-year, you have your standard increases for your own personal compensation. But rather than you meeting with the club every year and trying to fight for increase in your budget for your staff and your payroll, it was kind of built into your contract as well. So it was just really black and white between you and the club. Here it is on paper. We have a budget of, let's say, 250,000 in 2019, and in 2020 it's going to go to 275,000. It's going to escalate from there. Is that accurate?
Correct. So I originally went. I had 3 assistants at Brayburn, and you're always trying to fight to get them, but bump here, bump there, and it just became taxing after a while. Yet in my contract there was a black and white escalator annually. So the last time I went to the table, I included those 3 assistants, which did 2 things. One, it guaranteed I had 3 assistants. So if things became dicey at the club, they couldn't cut me an employee, and then the workload becomes twice as much for everybody across the table. So it protected how many people I had, number one, but it protected my people on a biannual basis. That was our deal. It was every 2 years. That number would be reassessed. That's why I would always come to you and ask you what the mean averages for the assistants were, because I would then bring that to my general manager and say, hey, listen, per my agreement on page such and such, here are the new salaries for the assistants, and my budget would be increased relative to those numbers, but it was in black and white.
Yeah, awesome, Nick. I'm just going to answer a quick question from Casey here, and then I'm going to pivot right back to a little bit how you prepare for your contracts, right? So now we kind of understand the importance of, why having something black and white on paper, and let's get into, how far in advance are you approaching those that are going to be making the decision, hopefully in your favor, and then what information are you gathering all along the way and preparing to have that negotiation with them. Casey, your question is regarding the compensation survey data and sharing that. And absolutely, I can share a screenshot of it right now. Here would be the Met PGA assistant data that we have on record. And I just want to let you know that this is all A8s in the section. So it could be second or third. And, your first assistants are typically north of the top 50% and top 75%. We also can share the top 10% as well. We keep this internally. In years past, as you remember, the compensation survey, at least on the national side, everyone could access it. But because of the filtering process, sometimes employers were getting a little bit aggressive and they weren't tailoring their information towards the assistance benefit. It was more so they were tailoring it towards keeping it on things under budget. So we felt it was really important based on the PGA members to keep this in-house and create these surveys that are specific for you. That way we are able to ensure that compensation is going to continue to increase amongst our professionals. It's our number one priority of career services. So thanks, Casey, great question there, and happy to share that with you. All you have to do is reach out to myself. Jeff has one as well at the section level, and so you can kind of compare both of those together, and then you provide that information to your employer. We also do some things that is considered a targeted compensation report. I'll share this in a little bit later because I anticipate Nick and Pat kind of going into that conversation about what data and metrics they're using to negotiate. So when we hit that point, I'll share what a targeted compensation report would look like. So Pat and Nick, you guys are now you're past your first year of being with the club. You're knocking it out of the park, and the club loves you, and you can sense that. So run us through a little bit about your mindset and how you're preparing for your next contract. What are the terms you're looking for? What are some things you're looking for to have written down that's certainly going to help you be a little more comfortable in your operation? So Pat, I'll kind of turn it over to you first, and then feel free to pass it on to Nick.
Yeah, I think as far as terms and length of agreement, it's a little bit dependent upon probably where you are in life to a certain extent, and how pleased you are in your position and how settled you are in the area. In my second negotiation at Catanset, so I'd been there for my first contract was 2 years, and went into a negotiation for my second contract, and we came to terms on a 4-year agreement. And the way it was set up was I didn't have a built-in increase annually. It was after 2 years, I could revisit with the guys I negotiated with and talk about salary increase within the terms of the original agreement. So that was my first kind of renegotiation of a contract, and not much really changed from the first one. We increased some of the percentages with the golf shop incentive, as I had mentioned before. I think I don't remember the exact percentages, but based on gross profit. So let's say the golf shop made a gross profit of $150,000. I got a percentage of that money as part of a bonus. If anything from 150,000 to 250,000, I got a higher percentage, and anything over that was a higher percentage. So it was, again, how well the golf shop did led into how well I did with a bonus at the end of the year. So I had that built in. That was kind of an incentive bonus, and I had just the standard performance bonus that was agreed upon by the board, or that was approved by the board based on how I did that year. And I always had, for that performance bonus, pre-written kind of goals to hit for the season that performance bonus was based on. And the nice part about this for me is I actually got the opportunity to put those goals on paper myself and work on them with my golf chairman. So I could kind of go into that year and say, hey, here's what I think we can achieve this year. Here are my goals, what I'd like to achieve. We had a meeting about it, agreed to it, and that went in my contract. So if I achieved the things that I put on paper personally, then the club was almost, I wouldn't say required, but they were going to give me the max bonus potential in my contract.
Pat, can I just interject for one quick
Sure.
second here about that? Because I do get a lot of questions about, hey, how do I structure my bonus? And so what are some things as examples that you had written on paper that the club or you were being held accountable for, and to meet those metrics to have your bonus at the end of the year?
I think, gosh, I'm going back a few years. I haven't revisited this in a while from what I wrote down at the time, but it was very specific to what was going on in the operation and what the goals of the facility were at that time. So one that I can remember is we were trying to increase play in tournaments. So, I had in there as a line item on this, goal sheet, overall tournament rounds, tournament participation increased compared to the prior year. So simple metrics like that you can affect based on how well you engage with the membership. I think I also had in there increase the number of lessons given throughout the season among the whole staff, not just me personally, but among everybody on the staff. So things, where you want to drive the operation and continue to grow the club and grow the facility, and again, grow the position for everybody, grow the compensation for everybody at the club. I think you can put some interesting items on paper if you really sit down and think about some things you can measure accurately that aren't subjective. I'd say pace of play is somewhat out of your control. So I don't think I ever had something like that in there, because it's, unless you have something that tracks the minute to minute detail, it's a little bit subjective and maybe not fair to be judged on that in your contract on a bonus perspective. But things that are measurable, that are fairly black and white, I think are good to have in there. And again, if you have control over it, all the better, because you can put in there what your expectation is that's realistic, and give yourself the best opportunity to max out your potential bonus on a contract. But we were speaking on length of term and things of that nature. So yeah, my second contract was 4 years, and again, I didn't see through the end of it because I left for this opportunity here. And again, at Noyak, my first contract was 2 years, and my current contract is now 5 years. Sorry, my first contract was 3 years. This current one is 5 years. So that's where I am today.
Yeah, thanks, Pat, and well said. Nick, same kind of question for you, but first, Monique had circling back to the staffing and the assistants. Were your assistants aware of that was in your contract, and did you share the details with them that they were going to receive increases?
I probably share more than I should with my assistants. We're like a big family. They know everything. I bring them in. I make them a part of it. I want them to learn through the whole thing, and I also want them to fight for what's theirs. We have the ability to speak for them at the board level or to our committee chairs, but they should have the opportunity to say things to us that we don't necessarily think through the lens that they may be looking at things through. So I'll give you an example. This past year, Braeburn was very, very busy in regards to our tournament program, busier than it had ever been. And because of it, they were stretched in different directions and weren't able to teach as much. Well, at the time, I wasn't looking at it that way. I was just trying to run the operation and get everything checked off the list. And, they weren't making what they had made historically. They brought it to my attention. It's then our jobs to go to the boards or our committees and explain to them, well, we've added a lot to our calendar, which is taking them off of the lesson tee and stretching them thin. And yes, we're working them just as hard, if not harder, but they're not being compensated the same because they're not able to earn, which is obviously the lion's share of their salaries are made on the lesson tee. Our job then to go and fight for them. So did the club do the right thing? You are always going to want the club to do more, but they did something. But if you're sees you fighting for them in that respect, I think they're only going to work harder for you. But I pull them in everything. They know every last detail as to what I'm doing to protect them because A, they deserve it, number one. And number two, I would hope if the shoe were on the other foot that I'd have that same understanding of what's happening for me and my career, my livelihood. So I do. I share with them absolutely everything. Piggybacking off of what Pat was just talking about on his second negotiation, mine was completely the opposite again. So I think that this is where this is working out nicely, Pat, because you have one way of going about things. I've had to go a different route. I don't know if Carl Alexander's on this, but he will never know how much he helped me at the very beginning of my career. So when I had the opportunity to go back to the negotiating table the second time, Carl took me to the side and I did a lot of just listening, and he went on and I explained to him my situation. He said, Nick, I'm going to give you a bit of advice because I know where you're coming from. I know the club very well. And don't give them the platform to pay you, but to work you so hard that you hate the business. At the time, we were so understaffed. He told me, he says, if you can fight instead of for yourself, but for more help, you'll be able to give a better experience. And when you go to the table again, then you'll have more leverage because Brayburn will be in a different atmosphere in regards to what membership offerings there were. So my second negotiation was another short-term one intentionally. I remember asking for a 2-year deal with 2 additional assistants without much change to my contract at all. And the sell was I wanted to give more membership experiences, a better ladies program, a better tournament offering, more tournaments. But to Carl's point, I could take some of those pressures off of myself because I was doing a lot of the work as both a first assistant and head professional because we were so understaffed. And Carl kind of took me by the hand. And if he is in here, I'll never be able to thank you enough. He gave me the correct resources to do my job correctly because it is easy to sometimes take advantage of a first-time head professional and ask them to do everything themselves. And yeah, you can run hot and you can only do so much. So Carl gave me the ability to ask for the things that don't necessarily show up on a salary, which was more help, number one, all my tournament expenses paid for, all my education paid for, a car allowance, just the small little things that don't necessarily show up on a salary item, but made my life easier in regards to the ability to spread out the work over more people, yet give more offerings to the membership. So very different approach. Carl, love you for it. If you didn't give me that advice, don't know if I'd be sitting here right now.
Guys, let's go into yeah. Go ahead.
That's kind of interesting that you bring that up, Nick. And I go back to my first kind of interview experience at Catanza, my first job there, and throughout that process, when you're going through the interview, you know, you're getting questions: how would you staff the operation? How would you run this? How would you run that? And I always put together a pretty detailed plan. You know, a lot of guys put forward a portfolio. I kind of do more of an operational plan for that club based on what I've learned about it through my research. And so a lot of that in the interview process came up. And when it came time to sit down and talk about my compensation and contract, a lot of these things came up. And part of the negotiation, to your point, is not just about how much, you know, what's in it for you, but it's on the other side, how much help are you going to get to achieve your goals and make the club a better experience. And in both cases, after going through the interview process, part of my negotiation process was, hey guys, I've laid out this plan for you of how I'd like to run the operation. Are you going to commit the resources necessary to carry out the plan as it's on paper? And in both cases, the club was willing to do so and came to the table with more payroll to bring on the proper number of staff members, to purchase certain things like, for example, a TrackMan or some certain type of software that will make running the operation easier. So a lot of these things that come up in your interview process of how you would run the operation are important to have on paper. The club's going to commit the resources to actually let you carry out the plan you presented to them. So that's kind of it's almost like two negotiations in one. One, you're trying to get and lock up your own personal compensation, but you're also trying to make sure that you have, to Nick's point, the resources to do your job well. And that's almost more important than your own compensation.
Guys, just a question about going back to what you deem you want in your contract. So let's discover like the absolutely necessary wants. Certainly it's salary, right? It could be benefits. What are absolutely necessary things that you have in your contract? And then also, what are some things that probably aren't necessary, but are kind of like that cherry on top? And then other things that you find yourself continuing to fight for in your contract that you feel like that could be a benefit. So Nick, you first, and then kind of I'll go to Pat. And then after that, we'll go into the absolute negotiation, getting the employer or decision maker in the room, and then having that conversation. But let's go through the wants first, and kind of identify those. So if there's something in the room that someone doesn't have, they can kind of, hopefully ask for that in the near future.
I mean, I'd say when you talk about a contract is supposed to be protection. So I've always more or less reverse engineered a contract as to how am I going to protect myself and my team. I mention team all the time. Mine was first and foremost severance. I mean, when we're always talking about the ability to better ourselves, there's always going to be that fail safe that is always got to be there at the end of the day, which is if things go terribly wrong, it's still my job to protect my family, protect myself. So I always started with, if the train was off the track, what happens from that point going forward? So I own the golf shop. A big piece of it was the buyout clause for the shop. How much compensation was I going to be looking at relative to my contract being terminated? Was there going to be anything that is going to put me in a tough position going forward? Because if you lose your job in this business, it's hard to pick up the pieces. It's a tough business. It's a competitive business. And I think a necessity, if you're talking about a contract, is just being able to protect yourself and your people as best possible. So my contract personally, I originally, for the first 7 years, had a 6-month severance package. This last one, I negotiated a 9-month severance package that was going to be paid in full. And I also had my bonus that would have then been broken up and given to my assistants at that point, if that contract were to be broken, just so that there wasn't going to be nothing for them at the end of the day as well. So those were the pieces that I had put in that I needed to have as part of my contract. And then obviously the other thing is just going to be the salary, and then the responsibilities to the shop.
Nick, and as far as the escalation of salary, some things that kind of keep us up at night is the cost of living. Right now, we're an 8.7% cost of living increase from last year to this year. Did you have that built in as well, or was it just a flat item? Let's say it was 100,000 using that number, and then you're 4 years in and it's still at that 100,000. Was it escalating, or did you have it flat?
No, I had a 4% increase built into each one of my contracts. So I never had an issue with it. The club they created that platform from the very beginning. Once I had a multi-year deal, I don't know it any other way. But up until recently, it was always enough to cover the difference in inflation. Not to jump around a little bit, but I know, Jonathan, we were talking before we jumped on here on durations of contracts, and it's uncomfortable having to go to the table, especially if you don't have much leverage, or Pat, you had mentioned it earlier, if you're not necessarily keen on who you're going to be negotiating with, because that certainly does change as well. But my last contract that I signed was a 10-year deal, which I thought at the time was like, I knocked it out of the park. That's awesome. I don't have to do this for a long, long time. But I signed that deal in September of 2019. COVID hit in March of 2020, and the whole world changed. So, and with the change of that also was the market. So that 10-year deal, which I thought was unbelievable, ended up, had I seen it to the very end, probably not been as beneficial as I would have thought it had been, because the market did reset with COVID and the changes that came with COVID. So there are pieces to this where, I'm not going to sit here and say like every negotiation I've had has been flawless. I would say hindsight that would have been one of the pitfalls that I had that wouldn't have behooved me in the end.
Yeah, well said, Nick. And then, like, what are some of the other little things that you have in your contract that you remember? Obviously there's compensation, there is your bonus, obviously is there health, 401k, what does the club contribute to 401k? Is there clothing? Is there a car? Is there, does the club pay for some of your shop help? Like all those little things kind of add up to one big thing. Anything that comes to mind that you can share with them, with anyone in the audience that certainly someone might have missing from their contract?
Yeah, this is going back to Carl. Carl always talked about the little things that don't necessarily tick the box of your salary. Now, obviously the salary is going to increase with time, but at the very start, I've had a car allowance, all of my tournament expenses paid for, education. I had a $7,000 slush fund that can be used for anything at my discretion. All of the PGA show expenses were covered by the club. There was a lot of nuances that I had that were kind of perks. My bonus structure at the end of the year. Pat, you were mentioning earlier, like you had carrots in order to get to bonus. Mine was basically, if I finished the calendar season, I had a flat bonus that was going to be paid out to me this time every year. So it was a good faith employment bonus, essentially, for finishing out a year in good standing. But it's funny, car expenses, gas expenses, tournament, education, that slush fund, those things go a long way, especially when you go to the gas pump with it almost $4.20 where I am right now. You fill it up and you don't think about it when the club's paying for it, but when it's coming out of your pocket, that's damn expensive. So those little things definitely add up to tens of thousands of dollars at the end of the day. Tournament expenses are going up annually; they have to. PGA dues; these are all very expensive pieces. So if you're an accomplished player and the club's going to be paying for your tournament expenses, and you can also make a check on top of it, I mean, these things can go a long way. And I never personally thought they were all that difficult in my contract negotiation to attain. Those were easier, certainly, than a big bump in the salary.
Yeah, I have very similar things in my contract, and it's almost I would ask Jonathan, it almost seems like those things have almost become standard now in most of these employment agreements for head professionals, and I hope that's the case anyway. But I do, like you, I have kind of an education fund that it's $10,000 that I can use for, let's say, for example, I took one of the TPI classes that was paid for by that fund. If my assistants want to do educational experiences, I have the ability to pay for their educational opportunities, tournament entry fees, things of that nature. Something else I have in mind, and going back to what the question was before about things that are important to you, and I think everybody on the call is probably going to come at that a little differently because we all have different priorities or needs. But for me, and I have 2 young kids, and families very important. So I have a life insurance policy the club pays for on my behalf. God forbid something were to happen to me, at least I know that that there's some money that will help offset expenses for my wife and my kids. And additionally, education for my kids is very important. And we all know the cost of education is continuing to increase, and who knows how much it will be in 15 years when my kids are college age. So I have a deferred compensation plan within my contract that that pays me a lump sum at the end of my 5-year term should I see it through the end. And that money is earmarked to go into my kids' 529 accounts. So those two pieces were really nice add-ons to my contract to basically give me some more support from my family. It was really nice the club did those things, but again, I think those may be a little unique as far as contracts go, and I was surprised how willing the club was to do these things. It was actually my conversation during the process was, hey guys, I really, what's really important to me is education for my kids, and if there's anything we can be creative with to come up with a way to help me fund their college accounts every year, that would be great. And they kind of came back with this, we'll give you X amount if you see the end of this 5-year contract that's earmarked to go toward your kids' education. So it was kind of their idea. That the person I negotiated with is in the life insurance and investment business, so he does a lot of these things for his clients, and was kind of lucky in a way that he was the one I was negotiating with to get that worked into my contract too. So, but to your point, Nick, obviously base compensation, bonus, little things like tournament expenses, they add up pretty quick. It's a big benefit at the end of the day.
And Pat, also, you and Nick are geographically very different. So I do want to get to the question of the expected time on property. And I would anticipate that you do have something in your contract that is along the lines of either your expected time on property or golf shop and golf shop hours. Can you just explain a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, I actually don't have anything black and white in my contract of expected hours of operation. I think that's just assumed when we're going through our annual planning. But I am expected to be on property from club open to club close, as far as April 1st through the end of October. After that point, I can kind of be wherever I'd like to be. I'm not tied to being at the club for the winter months. Like, I can travel, I can do what I'd like during that time. But I am required to be available and on property most days between April 1 and the end of October. I don't have anything in my contract as far as number of days per week or number of hours per week, or I have to be there every weekend. I can use my judgment on that, and I'm usually there, but I am able to take some time in September with my family. We usually do a little 3 or 4 day trip every September that it's not in my contract, but it's always been something the club has allowed me to do without any issue post Labor Day, in my case, which is when things taper off a bit. So, I really don't have much in there as far as expectation of time at this moment in this particular contract.
Got it. How about you, Nick?
Mine's a little different. Not wildly different. Mine was March 15th through November 15th for the golf shop. We've got an indoor hitting facility that was rather busy over the winter months, but I didn't have to personally be there. I would always go, for the most part, Fridays and Saturdays. I would take Sundays off, be with the family, and then it was at my discretion Tuesday through Thursday. There was no chain to the golf shop or any of that. We taper off quickly. Pat, sounds like you guys taper off in the fall season quickly. I know a lot of other clubs are open. They're open right now with the holiday season buys and all that. I've been at the same facility for a long time, and we were basically mid-November, we were done. And then everything would transition inside to the indoor hitting facility. So time on property, the only thing I had in my contract was the golf shop. Pat, very similar to yours, March 15th to November 15th. And the only mention in my contract of the indoor hitting facility was just having it staffed, but it didn't say it necessarily had to be by me during that off season.
Thanks, guys. Pat, I want to go back to what you mentioned before about your children's 529, and it kind of tips into what is deferred compensation. I think we hear it a bunch. We actually have it coming down from the National Association, but that's a little bit different. We were always advising that if you're maxing out your 401k and your club is maxing that out, that you can look into other investment vehicles to help put tax deferred money away for you. Deferred compensation is really referred to as golden handcuffs. So I would anticipate, Pat, if you were to leave the club in under, I think you mentioned 5 years, that you wouldn't be entitled to that lump sum, right? So that kind of keeps you at the club. The club is confident in you being their head golf professional, but also entices you to continue there for the end of the rainbow. It also is a little bit, you obviously have young kids, that's important to you, but also for those professionals that might have, children that are out of college, you can still work in a deferred comp plan into your contracts that should you hit that 5 years or, 5+5, it helps keep you at the club. And maybe you do take a little bit less in your compensation initially to get to that point, but it's also like that sticking part for you and the club to be joined together. It's a little bit harder to break something like that, Pat. So I guess a question into that, also deferred comp, which is great to talk about. And I think the club just did it graciously for you, but also should anyone have any questions, Pat is a great person to ask about how that, how he has it written in his contract. But I also know, back to the seasonality, you are in Eastern Long Island, and all of our area is really high cost of living, and there it's really high cost of living. Can you talk a little bit about what the club has done for you as far as helping you with housing as well? I think that's kind of written into your contract as well, and certainly something that shouldn't be an oversight should you need help with that from the club.
Sure. Yeah. So the club, in my contract, I get a housing allowance, which is it's effectively additional compensation. It's W-2. It's not tax free or anything of that nature. So, but it's earmarked specifically for housing to offset my annual housing expense. And it's a number that we came up with that was comfortable for the club and comfortable for us. Didn't really dig into what other guys in this area get, if anything, for housing allowance annually. Mine is probably a little bit on the lower end from what I've heard in recent days from people that have come out here. But anyway, in any case, it does help offset the expense of our mortgage payment every month, which is great. I get that once a month. It's kind of a once monthly check that I get, and again, taxes come out just like it would from your regular paycheck. But that number is not rolled into my total compensation, because when I get an annual increase, that number stays flat. So it's kind of pieced out from my regular comp. But another thing the club offered to do, we thankfully didn't need to take this offer up from them, but they offered down payment assistance for us. So if we needed some money up front to put a down payment on a home, the club was willing to loan us the money at a very low interest rate to be paid back to them over time. So that's something that they've offered to us as well, which we didn't take advantage of, but it was a nice kind of good faith, not in contract, but just kind of a good faith offer that they made to us when we came here and we're looking for a home.
Awesome. And then one more question before we get into actually negotiating with the parties that make those key decisions for you and everyone on this call. Nick, you mentioned before that the shop buyout clause, right? And I do review contracts quite frequently, and that's something that I look for in every single contract, knowing that the professional owns their own golf shop. And I'm often shocked sometimes when I don't see the buyout clause. Can both of you talk a little bit about how your buyout clause reads, and obviously why that's so important?
Pat, you want to go first on this one, bud?
Go ahead, Nick. I'll let you take it.
So my buyout clause was pretty straightforward. We're dealing with a lot of logo merchandise, and the agreement basically was whatever, I'm going to call it dead inventory, but inventory that hadn't moved by season's end that was logoed, the club would take responsibility for that and give me 50 cents on my dollar for it. So that was the negotiation on the back and the forth as the ownership of the shop. Anything that was hard good that could be sent back was in order to try to work out with my manufacturers to send those on back. I'm in a unique situation where I'm leaving right now, but I'm not active. Club's not buying my inventory because my former assistant is taking over my spot. So it's a very nice transition in that respect. But you're talking a lot of money. You could be let go in July and you're on the hook for quite a bit of inventory. So to have that money out of pocket, that was important to me. That and the severance, those two pieces tied together, because I've heard horror stories. We've all probably seen it or know people who've been stuck with being told they've got to run the golf shop and then being let go and having a lot of their income tied into something that they're not going to be able to take, and certainly not going to be able to move very well outside of their own walls of their facility. So mine was a straightforward percentage deal relative to what I paid for it, how much I had left over, and anything with that logo on it was going to be their responsibility.
I don't have much to add to that, Nick, to be honest. Mine's very, very similar.
Yeah, so some really important things there. That if you're working in a private facility and you have logoed merchandise, should there be a separation from the professional or for the club, just as Nick mentioned, saying that, okay, we're gonna decide to go another direction here, to have some downside protection for the PGA professional. It's really important to have very descriptive buyout clause. It typically is the club is responsible for all logoed merchandise, and they will purchase that from the PGA professional, provided you give the invoices at cost. Should it be from previous years? So let's say it's from 2021 and 2020. You can factor in some depreciation of 10% for each year. So at 2022, it would be at cost. If it's 2021, it's considered a little bit older merchandise, so it would be cost minus 10%. We're just trying to get the PGA member whole as the separation is occurring. But very important, as that is probably the largest area of exposure a PGA professional can have should you own your golf shop. Gentlemen, let's get into negotiating, right? I think you're both very good at it. Some of us have that naturally in you. You just have a way about how you negotiate. You have good emotional intelligence. You can read the other party well. Give us some information or some best practices about, now you have all the wants, you understand what you're going to try to fight for in your contract. Talk to the group a little bit about, your preparation going into that negotiation, and then effectively when you're at that table sitting across from the other party, how do you go about getting a compromise and hopefully something to, more so in your favor for the outcome. So I'll go probably Nick, or Nick, toss it on to Pat.
We were chatting about this the other day, and it's another, Pat and I just have very different approaches to it. Not saying one's better than the other, but I think a lot of it has to do with the club and who you're working with. The individuals that you're going to be negotiating with, I think for the most part, are going to dictate how that negotiation is going to unfold. I'm a little bit more aggressive when I negotiate. I want to have as much data as humanly possible, but I also have had aggressive people that I've been negotiating with. So if I just, for the most part, took what they were going to offer, I was going to be on the short end of the stick. I say it only because when I took my job in 2010, I was young. I probably took the lowest paying salary relative to a head professional in the Met section. And had I not been aggressive, I would have always been trying to make up for that lost time. I was being paid a glorified lead assistant salary at that time. And I was always negotiating off of that original number. So I was always behind the bell curve trying to catch up. So as I became a little bit more seasoned and a little bit more tenured in my career, I had to be a little more aggressive in order to try to push the envelope harder in order to get to where I should have been probably at an earlier point in my career. So Jonathan, you were always clutch with me. You gave me plenty of data. My angle was we all come from different facilities. I always ask my club to tell me who are our sister clubs, and they'll always rattle off sister clubs and whether we really do measure up with. I'm just going to use the names, like they would always say with Quaker Ridge and Century and Old Oaks, and is Braeburn in that orbit? They're the ones that said we were, so I'm going to go and use their numbers. They only did me the favor by giving me these very high-end facilities to use as a reference, and so I would take what they have and say, we're going to call ourselves a sister club of these facilities. Well, this is what these sister clubs are offering, and this is what these sister clubs are paying. And they would always want to peel off of it, and then I'd have to aggressively say, but you told me that those are our sister clubs. So the fight was always for me to try to get to where I should have been from the start, but 26 years old, I was going to take whatever darn contract they had given me. So Pat, I wish I would have had your opportunity to have had more of a softer arms wrapped around, nice transition. My nature of my beast was different, buddy.
Falling onto a pillow, yeah. But very similar as far as preparation goes. I'm very much data driven. I like to have as much information as possible before I go into a room to have any type of conversation with anybody on really anything. So using Jonathan and some of the metrics he puts together is extremely valuable, not only for like a total number, but also, you know, pieces that can get you there. And again, I'm beneficial to have a facility that's in the very high rent district out here and have neighbors that have higher rents than what my club is. So to Nick's point, let your, you know, the people you're negotiating with identify your sister clubs, and that gives you a little leverage to say, well, you know, you gave me Atlantic, Friars Head, and Sabonic and the Bridge as sister clubs, which is going to have more often than not, and for most of us, the clubs that your members identify as their peer group are going to be maybe a little bit, you know, the clubs might be a little bit better or well thought of than where you might be. So that might help you. And I would try to go into these conversations again from a different perspective from Nick. My first move had been to let them tell me what they were thinking. Again, I don't know whether it's right or wrong, but it's worked out for me and the ones I've gone through. And on 2 occasions, I've been pleasantly surprised that they were thinking a number that was more than what I was thinking. So had I gone first and said something, I would have undercut myself by a few dollars. So, you know, I've kind of taken that approach to let them make an offer to me. And again, I've been lucky to be pleasantly surprised that what they put on paper for me was more than what I was going to ask for. So I've kind of gone into it with the, you know, make sure that that you don't ask for less than they're willing to give you type of an arrangement. But my approach has always been one of gratitude and being thankful that the club is going to invest in me and invest in my family, and wants to develop a long-term relationship with me. So I try to go into the meetings with a soft touch, being very thankful and you know, but not afraid to ask for what I need or what others in the area are getting that I feel I should get to. But going at it with a bit of a softer touch, not quite a bulldog. You know, Nick, maybe you had to be a bulldog sometimes in your negotiation room. I was more the other way, kind of quiet and listening and trying to come to a consensus around where we wanted to go.
And Nick, if I can remember, you were probably the exact opposite. You shot for the moon and were like, okay, here it is. Here's what I want. And go club now, try to figure it out for me. Is that fairly accurate?
Yes and no. I mean, I started off at a very low number. And so Braeburn would always say, well, we're thrilled with the way things are going. And this is where we are right now. So we'll, you know, if we bump it up a little bit was always like the key word. If we bump it up a little bit, but I'm like, well, we started so low. if we bump it up a little bit and we keep bumping it up a little bit, then this isn't going to be an applicable job relative to our sister clubs, which you continuously mentioned throughout this entire process. So it was basically, okay, let's take these clubs that you identified. These are where these individuals are. You just told me that you were very happy with the programming right now and the way things are going. And, you know, I only plan to continue to try to push the envelope relative to where we are right now. And that being said, I'd like to be compensated for the job that I'm doing, not for the opportunity that I was given 2, 3, 4 years ago. So it was always trying to further where I was currently, not reminding where we were when we started at the beginning.
Yes, you kind of just like set the trap early on with them asking what their peer set is. And typically the clubs are always going to look at someone that's just a little bit above them as their peer set. So when they do that and you come back to the table with, you know, the compensation results, and I'm going to share with everyone right now what would look like a targeted compensation report. You know, it's very black and white for them. And unfortunately for them, if their peer set is a little bit is equal or above, well, then the compensation is going to be equal or above as well. I asked Ben, I think Ben's on the call today, if he would allow me to share his targeted compensation report. We just actually redid our report in the past year. It's a little bit, just the formatting is just a little bit more visually pleasing. And but the numbers are all the same, and Jeff does a really wonderful job of taking the section data as well, and identifying the facilities that are in the peer set as well. So please, that you have multiple resources at your discretion, but going to the table without this and just throwing a number out there is probably not the best approach. Like, you know, metrics are being armed and dangerous is with data is very beneficial for you. So there's just a little bit of obviously the imagery of Westchester Country Club here, so you can tell it's specific to the club. A little bit of background from the compensation data. Here we get into the peer set of what the club finds themselves as being their peer set. Obviously, Westchester is a little bit unique, having 36 holes in the area. And being private and being a high use. You can see right here, we use 7 of the 9 are used in this report. That way we can kind of confidentially protect the PGA members in the section. If we said, these are the clubs that are used, someone's gonna probably figure out who's high and who's low. So we do use a 7 out of 9, or we just don't use 100% of the clubs. There's no way that anyone can kind of figure out what compensation is which. We do look at the base pay, as you can see here, the top 25%, but the real number that we look at here is the total compensation. When Jeff and I go into negotiations with clubs, we refer to it as a pie, like a pie chart. The total compensation is really all that matters, because a PGA professional's compensation, typically at the head professional director of golf world, is made up of 3 components. It's made of the lessons, the income earned from lessons, your base salary, and the net profit from golf shop. So if one piece of the pie is a little bit larger, so say the golf shop is a little bit more profitable, typically the base pay is a little bit smaller. But if you have a golf shop that's not as profitable, then your base pay needs to be inflated, and that part of the pie needs to be a lot bigger, because really at the end of the day, all that matters with your peer set is that number on the right, and is that total compensation. So I know that a lot of us are protective of our shop numbers, and that's fine. You know, everyone has the, you know, can be as transparent using discretion here, but the number on the right is what we're trying to go for. So here's an example of just what we do with targeting our peer groups here. And in this case, it just made sense to use the tenure of head professional experience, because in this case, Ben kind of fit right into the median at top 25%. You know, and whether this data is helpful for you, great. It might not be, but it's just good to have this information as we, you know, as we try to increase PGA member compensation in the area. We always, and this is one of the reasons where you hear us at every fall and spring meeting, please fill out your compensation survey, please fill it out, because essentially a rising tide rises all ships. The more data we have every year, and the more that we share these numbers with clubs, and Club A increases the compensation, now Club B is looking at, they're going to increase, and we're going to keep laddering up and up and up. So effectively, the more conversations we have using the compensation data and the results, the quicker we're going to increase PGA member compensation. And we can do this on on a peer set as well. Even if you're an assistant golf professional, we can do it. Carly Newman actually brought up something the other day with me that was eye-opening. We're able to kind of go into the data. So even if we have enough female PGA members fill it out as well, we can actually go in and do a targeted comp report for female PGA members, and kind of, so that helps you negotiate an increase in your compensation based on that peer set as well. So again, shameless plug for the comp survey, but I think all in this chat can agree it's vital for us, and it helps your fellow member out to have that. What sometimes is a tough conversation, but you have a little bit more ammo behind you when you sit at the table and just instead of blindly asking for, this is what I think I deserve. And then along those lines, Pat and Nick, right? So it's really tough. And in my experience with PGA members is that the PGA member is amazingly humble. It's amazing to work with all of you day in and day out. But I say a lot of times, it's almost like PGA members humble to a fault, right? So you provide world-class service to your members every single day, and you do things that are so extraordinary. And sometimes the membership or the club or the golfers at your facility, it might go unnoticed. So just because you give a golf lesson to someone, someone might say that, oh, that PGA member is just earning additional revenue by giving that golf lesson. But we all know, because you give that golf lesson, that person's going to play more golf. They're going to spend more money on in the golf shop. They're going to probably spend more money on food and beverage. They're going to introduce guests to the club. They're going to participate in club events. Like it just goes so much further down the road. So I guess, guys, what are you doing? So and also along the lines of providing that compensation information, are you doing anything to kind of track your interactions with your members to showcase the value that you and your team provides to your members day in and day out?
I'll jump in. Yeah, I do. Every year at the end of the year, I provide what I call like an executive summary of the year to my board, which is kind of my review of how the year went from my perspective, not only my personal performance, but the performance of my team and things within the operation that I think we can continue to improve, or that we need help with, or need more resources to carry out. And as part of that, I look at a few different metrics. I look at obviously total rounds of golf. I look at number of lessons given by my staff, including clinics and things of that nature. And I ask each of my assistants to put together a little report that I call their member engagement report for the year. So I asked them, how many different members did you play golf with this year? How many different members did you give a lesson to? How many members did you maybe play an event or pro-am with or travel with? So I try to get to a total number for my staff annually of different people that are engaged within our programs. So for my director of tournament operations, part of his metric is how many different members participated in at least one club organized event this year, how many participated in two, et cetera. So those are some things that I track, that I present to the board, that says, hey, here's how we as a team engage with our membership on an annual basis, and here are the number of people that have been engaged with our programs and our instruction and our tournament operations. So that's just a little bit of what I do. It's fairly basic. I'm sure there's some on the call that have some more detailed things they track. I'm always trying to add to that and come up with easier ways to track that information too.
Brayburn was a little different. Brayburn did it internally. There was a consulting firm that came in, and everything was, the entire membership had to fill out all of these surveys, and they pinpoint different pieces of each operation. Golf was specific to itself, and we had all that data, and then obviously tied in our tournament schedule, amount of tournament rounds played, separate from just rounds that are played, and then corporate rounds are another entity that we tie into the whole thing. So the board wanted to see a cross segment of golf, its participation, not just this year, but we were really trying to relate it to the pre-COVID years, because ours was all about, like everybody else, I'm sure, staffing, and we have appropriate staffing relative to the amount of rounds that we're putting out now compared to 2019. but then our club itself does all of the surveys. So it kind of takes a lot of the onus off the golf professionals themselves, just simply because we're having that done by the club. But it also gives us the platform to have nice discussions with the board when, hopefully, obviously they did, but when the results come back and they're positive, you can galvanize it and use it as a chip the next time you go back to the table. So they all can work in your favor. I'm a big fan of the surveys. I think they go a long way into getting a cross segment of the entire membership in their experiences.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Got two questions here. Monique, I'll tackle yours first. It's regarding what I believe is the revenue scorecard, and although beneficial, was a little bit different to use. Has that been updated? So the team at headquarters and specifically the player development department is kind of revisiting that. We found that it was very valuable for PGA members to kind of utilize. It was like filling out your compensation survey, but it was a little bit more along the lines of how many customers did you interact with? What did you charge per lesson? Did you conduct junior league golf? What was that fee? Did any members join the club because of PGA Junior League Golf? What was their average spend on food and beverage? And all that information compounded together would come up to a really large number. So we had a couple that were, $250 million, somewhere $500,000 because of the ancillary revenue that is attributed to the PGA members' interaction with, your club members every single day. So that was a really useful tool for us to provide as well during the contract and negotiations. So you have on one side, you have your peer set, which you're comparing yourselves to, and on the other side, you're trying to showcase your value to your employer, and something like the revenue scorecard was really beneficial. Pat, you do it internally. Nick, you do it internally as well. Food and beverage, Monique, is difficult to track. You have to have like a point of sale system that integrates with one another. So it's tough. It's not impossible. Like PGA America has partnered with a company called Sagacity. They're starting to work with the private clubs. They were typically a public golf course, public facing, but now they're more private. But in its very infancy, if you are able to show that, okay, you've conducted group programming, and in the back of your mind, you said, okay, now two of these members brought in new families that have now joined the club, and your dues, for example, are $10,000, right? So yeah, you can say I brought in $20,000, but let's take a step back and say, these members are probably going to be here for about 10 years. That's the average, duration of a membership. So in fact, you brought in $200,000 of cash into the club during that time. That's just on one example. And I think that those are some things that PGA members do every single day, that when we turn back, we say, it's really important to kind of keep track of all these small wins, because they add up to one giant number. And then Pat, I think James had a question for you as well here. Do you have a template for that engagement report? And if so, are you willing to share?
James, I don't have a template. I have my assistants basically create their own Word documents each year and leave them for me. And I have the executive summary I put together is like a 6 or 7 page Word document. I have some nice graphics I put in there and photos, but I don't really have a template. It changes annually based on things I want to highlight.
Okay, and then so if anyone needs help with that, we still have access to the old scorecard, and certainly can reach out to Pat, myself, and Nick, and work on some things for you to kind of look at, because every facility is different, and there are things that are important for each facility. So could be your tournament participation, it could be your junior participation, and we certainly can track that. There's a couple of members that I know that are on here that they track range visits, right? Because just because your rounds may be constant, the usage of your practice facilities may be up exponentially, and that takes a burden on you and your staff. So tracking all these little things can help you negotiate for increases in resources as well. So something
I'll jump in. Jump in quick. We just started tracking range visits this year. We have Top Tracer on the range now, which makes it incredibly easy to track range visits. You log on, it tells you how many people have visited the range and how long they stay on the range and how many balls they hit, and all kinds of interesting information. So I've just started to track that data now, and it'll be useful to your point for that purpose going forward, how busy the range is and what it takes to staff that experience.
Yeah, fantastic. I've got one question before I kind of get into like maybe some more of the wrap up questions. Something for me that I've had a tough time kind of comprehending, or I'm not sure what the best answer is for this. And it has to do with the renewal of your contracts. Do you have an opinion on when is the best time for you personally to have a new contract or to renew your old contract? Is it December 31st? Is it July 1st? Is it October 1st? So I guess where are you now, and what is ideal?
I mean, you and I have talked about this, so I know your viewpoint on it. I've never been too concerned with it until I had a conversation with you, and a lot of things that you said made a lot of sense. But mine is calendar year, January 1 to December 31. That's what mine have always been. But I might revisit that the next time I go through it based on, your thoughts on it, which I find very, very interesting.
Actually, Jonathan, I'd love to hear yours. Mine's November 1st is my fiscal season, November 1 through obviously Halloween.
Yeah. I'm not sure, right? So I used to come in with the perspective, oh, if you had a contract that started July 1st, it's a lot more difficult to replace someone July 2nd than it would be, January 1 or October 1. So that was my initial thought. But then again, I said that, is that realistic? Nick, to your point previously on, you want to make sure that you're set up for success, and the unlikelihood, but there is the likelihood that the contract isn't renewed. How much time are you giving yourself to seek another opportunity? And then where's the opportunity for us? So if our contract expired December 31st, how much time do you have to get your materials together and then to interview and then to go through a process should you be seeking your next opportunity? If that was the case. So is January 1 enough time? For some of you, it might be. So I think that I'm more inclined to go with the perspective of just be aware if the contract is not renewed, do you feel you are comfortable enough to have enough time, should you want to interview for another position? So is it October 1st? Is that the renewal date? And that's kind of like mainly the wrap up of the season where everything is kind of hitting your crescendo. You've just come out of your club championships. You're wrapping up. You're starting to get into your end of season events, and everything is on a high. And should it not be reviewed October 1st or middle of September, it gives you a little bit of a longer runway to get your materials together and to kind of network and get what would be another position for you. Yeah, does that make sense, Nick? I guess I'm not sold on one area or another. I just think that the example of having a longer runway is something that would be a little bit more comfortable with, and knowing that we're a little bit more seasonal here in the Northeast, that kind of starting to make a little more sense.
Yeah, I think if you had a July 1 or June 1, you just need to make sure that's something in there with regards to your bonus. If you get terminated in December and you have several months left on your contract, you just need to have a clause in there that would either guarantee you your bonus or make sure that you're whole for the months that you're owed in December or whenever you get let go. But I think the theme, a lot of things we've talked about today, a lot of the theme has been, back to Nick's point, contracts are there to protect you. And while we all expect everything to be rosy forever and things to be smooth, and we'll all get to have a retirement party someday, right? That's the pie in the sky. But to your point, things happen. Leadership at the club changes. That you might not see eye to eye with the different leadership that arrives, and it is important to have yourself protected. I think that's the point of a lot of what we've talked about today.
Yeah, well said. I know we have 20 minutes left here. It's amazing how quickly time has gone. I never felt that we could cover 2 hours and something like contracts, and amazingly so. We still have near 100% attendance still on the call here. So certainly if you continue to have questions, please feel free to write it in. We can open up the microphones as well. But Pat and Nick, just want to leave maybe some closing thoughts here. for the two of you. Maybe it's a little bit personal, but as you look forward to your next contracts, Nick, I know you're getting into a new facility here, but what are some things that you're going to concentrate on, being that the climate that we live in is so fluid, the cost of living is certainly different. The challenges with staffing is certainly very, very difficult right now. But let's look into the future now, and what are some things that are important to you as you start to anticipate negotiating, Pat, which would be your 5th contract, and Nick, which would be your 6th contract?
I'll jump in, Nick, first and say that I'd like to explore what you've added into yours with regards to assistance compensation and having that into my next contract. I like that premise a lot.
I've had the opportunity to spend quite a bit of time in the last couple of months with a lot of the assistants, at least in my small orbit here. And the older I get, I don't have children, so I'm drawn to help them and not forget being an assistant. There has to be, and Jonathan, if there's something that we've missed, or if there's somebody else on this Zoom that has a platform that is beneficial for the assistants, there's got to be something out there that can protect them moreover than what we're doing right now. It's so easy for them to kind of just get swept into this whirlwind of the golf business, but there's got to be something to protect them, to give them a better footing, so that they're not left out into the cold. So I'm still going to continue to push that. That's going to probably be if I got to hang my hat on something for my career, it might be the protection of an assistant. The deferred comp, I don't have that. I haven't even had the opportunity to have a conversation like that. Pat, I learned from you on that one, bud. So down the road, probably something I definitely would want to entertain. It sounds like it behooves both parties. If there's a mutual understanding of where they would like to go with the program. So I would definitely like to look at that. But Jonathan, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the assistants, because Pat and I chat about it, but is there something you've heard, seen, or that you'd like to see for us to do a better job for protecting them, or giving them a chance to even have a voice at the table?
Yeah, so I agree with a lot of what both you said. There's a couple things that our assistants are looking for. There's really 3 main things. It used to be compensation, and I still think that's paramount, especially in our area, because of cost of living is so high. Long gone are the days, for the most part, where the assistant is coming into an operation and they're kind of cutting their teeth for the hopes of possibly getting to a head professional position. I think we have a lot more stability in our assistant positions, because the compensation is starting to get to levels where they can actually live a quality life and raise a family in the area. So that has been a concern for a long time. But really, the other things that our assistants are looking for right now is, what are they getting from the experience at the club? And, Pat, as you mentioned before, you have a $10,000 education budget built in. So, how is the club reinvesting in their assistants to making them better? So when they leave your facility, they can kind of speak about it and take those learned experiences and contribute to another facility as well. That is certainly helping with retention. And then the work-life balance is, and we've heard a lot about this over the past 2 years. COVID really accelerated everything for us, and just identifying the work-life balance, the assistants being the messenger for the club, that the 7-day work weeks and from sun up to sundown might have existed, but that's not an environment that we are we're okay with as PGA head golf professionals, director of golf. And here's what would be appropriate, and kind of going to bat on behalf of the assistants. I think, Nick, to complement that, the one of the things, and probably the best thing that we've had success with, is the payroll per round. I think that metric we talked about on education ever since COVID, and that has really opened the eyes of the PGA members, and also the clubs, because they're starting to understand that, and they're starting to compare themselves where they used to be, and then their peer set. And that's a very fluid number. But when you start taking your payroll per round specifically for your staff, and comparing that where you were the year before and the year after, and you can budget accordingly to make sure that that payroll per round keeps increasing, you're essentially helping your assistants out to, one, have greater compensation, and then investing in possibly even more resources in the staff to give them more flexibility to take time away from the club. That and for those out on the call that are not aware what payroll per round is, essentially what you're doing is you're taking the head golf professional salary out of the equation. You're taking your golf operation budget as a whole number, and let's say it's $200,000, and then let's say the club does 20,000 rounds. You're dividing the 200,000 by 20,000. That gives you a $10 per round. What you want to do is you want to look at what your pre-COVID numbers were, and then where they are post-COVID. And as we've all experienced, the post-COVID numbers and the rounds of golf have increased tremendously. But the main concern is, has your budget increased proportionally? Some of your budgets might have increased, but it might not have increased proportionally, whereas now it's under 10. It could be $7 per round. So you could have gone from 20,000 to 25,000, but your budget only increased from 200,000 to 225,000. And that, we can actually see burnout when we start looking at the dollar per round. So, and it can fluctuate certainly and accordingly, but that comparing your facility and the dollar per round, and then if you take that to Nick, your point before, who do we compare ourselves with? Okay, we're at Brayburn, we compare ourselves with the other surrounding clubs, and maybe Brayburn was at 20 and the other surrounding clubs are at 27, $7 per round, and you're doing 20,000 rounds. That's a really large number to reinvest into the golf operations, and that certainly can help out a lot. Does that make sense, Nick?
100%. Yep.
Awesome. So I'm going to leave it, Pat, to you and Nick here. Any closing thoughts you have for anyone on here? Obviously, should you have any questions right now, feel free to type it in, take yourself off mute. Feel free to ask Pat and Nick any questions while you have them here. They're going to be a resource for you, myself and Jeff as well, for negotiating your contracts. But Pat and Nick, any closing thoughts? Pat, you're on mute, bud.
Sorry, thank you. Dog barking. I would just say lean on your peers in your area. You'd be surprised at how willing everybody is to share their thoughts or things that have worked for them, and go into any meeting you have with a club member prepared. That I think is the most important part.
I couldn't agree more. I'm all about data. At the end of the day, the club just wants to give the membership the best experience possible. And if you're doing a pretty darn good job, they're not going to want to see you unhappy. So at the end of the day, the more data you can go into the room with and fight for your people, I don't think that there's too much negative to be said for trying to protect those around you.
Yeah,
Do you want to hear from some people in the, I'm sure they have a lot of questions on things we may not have touched on or that are more pertinent to them. I'd love to hear what some of the others have to say. Caitlin, I don't know if you're there to allow that opportunity.
Yeah, if anybody has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself or leave a note in the chat. Kind of open forum right now.
And we certainly can hang for those that want to hop off. Thanks so much for joining us today. It's the first of many educational events as we get into the winter series with the Metropolitan PGA, which is fantastic. And then if you feel more comfortable asking, certainly in a smaller group, Nick, Pat, and myself will hang on and we can discuss as well.
Perfect.
So thanks for joining everybody today.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. John Hobbins, I don't know if you're on here or not. If you are, thank you for everything that you've done behind the curtain to make all of this this fall in line. You're the man.